Good.
Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to this session, first session here at MassCue Study Hall Revolution. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Steve Rando. I'm the co-founder of MyFlex Learning, and I'm so happy to be joined today by Allison Scanlon, who's the assistant principal of Barrington High School. We had planned to have Dr. Chris Jones with us from Whitman-Hanson. Unfortunately, he got pulled into another situation today. So we will talk a little bit about how Whitman-Hanson uses MyFlex Learning for Study Hall, and Ellen, who worked with them on their use of it, will add some color to that. But unfortunately, he won't be able to be here today. So let me just introduce a little bit. So first, Sarah, why don't you close up? So first, as I said, we were going to be joined by Dr. Chris Jones, but very happy to be still joined by Allison Scanlon, the assistant principal of Barrington High School. Allison, I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself a little bit more about yourself and your school.
Yeah, I mean, our school is roughly just under 1,200 kids, and we're a fairly high-performing school in Rhode Island. But we have joined with MyFlex. This will be our second year, I believe, with MyFlex. For a variety of reasons. First, for our Flex Eagle block, but then also it has changed our study blocks, and it's been really helpful. So glad to be here to talk about that.
Exactly, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That obviously our core of our product is built around flex blocks or wing blocks or whatever your school calls them, with the idea being allowing the flexibility for students to make choices as to where they want to go during that time, for teachers to be able to pull students in who need extra help during that time. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but what we're going to highlight today really first is how some of our schools have taken that flexibility or that ability that the system allows and interjected that into other areas. In this case, your traditional study halls or guided studies, or in Whitman-Hanson's case, we'll see they call them seminar periods, where basically what had traditionally been a time where students are assigned to a specific location and they're going to stay there and do a certain thing, maybe just read quietly or something like that. Schools are now allowing students to sign up for different opportunities. Okay, so we'll talk about what that requires, what you need, and what MyFlex really allows you to do. Okay. So a little bit, let's talk a little bit about Whitman-Hanson. Obviously, most of us, I think, approach from this area. We know a little bit, but let's just lay kind of the foundation. We're lucky enough to have a school from Massachusetts and a school from Rhode Island we're talking about. So I thought it was interesting. Both schools are about the same. So Whitman-Hanson obviously serves the two towns of Hanson and Whitman. Student enrollment is about just under 1,000 students, with about 128 teaching staff in MyFlex Learning using it. They run an 8-day, 6-period schedule. It's a kind of traditional drop-2 rotation. So each day, really, they have 6 classes, even though the students have 8, subjects that they're taking. They call their study halls seminars. So much like Barrington, Whitman-Hanson does use us for their, I believe they call it wind block. Is it their wind block? So they do have wind block, a traditional flex block. So they came to MyFlex Learning with really the purpose to manage that. But then, much like our other schools, they saw the ability to use this for their flex period, or what they call their seminar period. And just about those, most of their sections of those meet 5 of the 8 days. So a study section will be 5 of the 8 days. And I'll talk about why that's important in a second, okay? And then as Ali said, Barrington, about the same size, really. High school in Barrington, Rhode Island. Your master's schedule, and you can talk a little bit more about this, but a 14-day, 6-period schedule.
Yeah.
And then study sections usually will either meet 5 or 10 of those 14. So I don't know if you wanted to add a little more color to your schedule.
Yeah. We have our studies are unique. We have a lot going on during our study blocks. We have an everyday study and we have an every other day study. Our every other day study backs up on our PE. We don't do semester-based PE, but we have some students who do semester-based PE. And then we have an everyday study, so if a student decides not to take an elective or whatever it may be, they have that. So they may have 2 studies per semester in their schedule. We have a 5 drop-2 schedule, and we also have what we call our Eagle block in the middle of the day, which is our flex block. But so a student could have a variety of different studies in their schedule, and it really, we were really conscious about making sure the kids were utilizing that time appropriately and not just sort of like wandering the building or doing whatever it is they want to do, and really holding them accountable, and then also giving them options to be able to sort through their own days. So that's why it's sort of a lot, and the 14-day schedule is sort of a lot, but I mean, it works for us so far, but that's a big part of this study.
My son's middle school has a 14-day schedule. I think they're crazy.
We have the 14-day because of PE. That's the only reason. Yep.
Often that's what drives it. What we're displaying here, just so you have an idea, is to the right is a student's master schedule in their student information system. They happen to use MassCue for their student information system. And then on the left is what a student is seeing in MyFlex. So what you'll see that is being represented in MyFlex is really that eagle's nest. Now I took this from this week, right? So you guys didn't have, I guess, Eagle's Nest Tuesday. But their Eagle's Nest, which that's their traditional flex block, right? So you notice for Barrington, it's every day, I don't know the exact times there, but it's every day, kind of that third block. But then the other periods we're seeing here are their study periods, and you'll see they kind of align, right? So section 121, of course, 150, the study, section 50, the study. Now, one thing we'll see in a second is it's important when you're doing this in a situation like Barrington's, where, as we said, some students will have the study for 10 days because they don't have that elective, and some will have 5 because it backs against the PE. It's important for MyFlex to know which days they're actually in study versus which days they're in PE, so that students can only sign up to go someplace when they're in study. We'll talk about how we do that, okay? But it's important, again, to have that communication between it. So this student on, here on the left will really only be able to sign up for something, go to library during their study hall times during these blocks you see here that are carved out on the period.
And it distinguishes between, so this student actually has 2 study blocks
Yep.
within their schedule. So
Yep.
the blue and the green, it's 2 different sections.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about kind of study halls in your school, Allie, and kind of, what drove you, I guess, first to kind of allow some movement, right? And then to kind of need a system or look for a system that would help you manage that. So has it always been kind of, you talked a little bit about the structure of study halls, 5 days versus 10 days. Have study halls always been something where students could sign up to go somewhere else? Is that always, or is that something new that was added in?
We tried, over the last couple of years, we've tried to have them move around, go to the library if they need to, go to school counseling if they need to. The problem was making sure we knew where kids were, all the adults being on the same page with where kids were. So it really is something a little bit new over the last couple of years. It's never been quite as organized as it is right now, which is part of what is great about MyFlex. But what we try to do is offer students the ability, we have sometimes it'll be 140 kids in a study block in a cafeteria, and so that might be the every other day study, and then we might have 15 kids in a classroom. Those kids in the cafeteria have said sometimes it would be easier if I went into that classroom study because it's smaller, I can study a little bit better, vice versa, I need a little bit more space. So even the movement between the cafeteria, the large study, and the every other day study, has helped, but kids can go to the library, they can go to school counseling, school counselors can pull students out of study, and we've also set it up so that students can make up tests, quizzes during that time, go meet with specific teachers, and schedule that as well during a study block.
Awesome. I think that's interesting. So you have really huge studies, or one huge study that's kind of like, in the cafeteria, and then smaller studies and is that always kind of been the case, that like a large study versus small studies, or? No,
we moved that out so that we can better have an understanding of who has an everyday study, who has an every other day study. Teachers were getting confused by that, so we wanted to make it as easy as possible.
Okay. And so how many of those smaller group studies do you have?
One every period. So every block except for one block, there's
just one a period.
There's technically 2 larger studies, and then one everyday study.
Okay. Cool. And so in those smaller groups, what's the student to staff ratio in the smaller?
It can be between 13 to 1, or it can be, we have one that has 32 students.
Okay.
So it kind of depends based on the period and where kids want to be. But kids will move out. So if I've got,
it's flux every day.
I've got 31 in one section, and talking to those teachers, it's never 31 students because they're going other places. So what they have found too is they're able to pull kids into their study and to do supports during that time too. Not just in the Eagle Block time, but in their study they'll pull kids.
Gotcha. So you had mentioned this a little bit, but so during that time, the options to sign up are really what? Library,
school counseling, meet with a teacher to make up or schedule a time to make up a quiz for a test, and work collaboratively with other students. And so meaning, if a student needs to work collaboratively in the large CAF, they can sign up to go to the CAF.
Now, when you had taken on this kind of this philosophy that you're going to allow movement rather than, hey, you're kind of restricted to where you are, did you try to do this previously without a system? Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you tried to use and kind of?
It was pretty old school. It was sort of come up with a list, whoever was managing the librarian or the school counseling, kids would go in there, they were supposed to have a pass, they didn't always have a pass. The librarian would, have an email and send it out to all study hall teachers, and then we had to assume the study hall teachers were checking their email and checking Aspen at the same time, so it was falling through the cracks. So it was really just an email.
Yeah, and who was then responsible? So were the kids kind of still in the study hall until the teacher sent them? Or?
That was what was supposed to happen, but that didn't happen.
Because attendance, I'm always thinking about, where does the kid show up? That person needs to be able to take attendance.
Attendance was a mess. We weren't able to hold kids accountable, and they recognized that too, so they were leaving the building. So there was a couple of different safety concerns that were happening with that when we were doing it via email.
Okay, interesting.
It wasn't working.
Right. So then, obviously, I don't know kind of what prompted, right? I mean, it was your use of MyFlex for the Eagle's Nest to kind of think of like what, this could be a situation where, I mean, really, this is exactly what MyFlex learning is built for. When we talk about it being for a flex period, I always say to folks, anytime that you need students to be able to move more flexibly than your student information system allows is an exact situation for a system like this. So, was there a big kind of tipping point, or was it just like, this seems like it could be something that, could help us manage this?
I think when we started utilizing it for Eagle Block, we just recognized how easy it was to use. The teachers were recognizing how easy it was to use. And so we just thought of all the possibilities, and we just continue to think of all the possibilities for what we can do for students in order to hold them accountable and know where everyone is going. So it kind of, once we had it in place for that, every other conversation was like, well, this is easy, we can just use MyFlex.
Right.
Or this is easy, we can just use MyFlex.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. So let's talk a little bit about, and I just kind of put together like a little visual of how it works, right? Because the one thing that's unique from a traditional flex block, or most high schools and even middle schools, traditional flex blocks is, for instance, in your Eagle's Nest or your Eagle Block, or for any of our schools that have one, generally the entire school population is participating in that time. So for instance, in Barrington, where they have that Eagle's Nest, the entire population, 9 to 12, maybe save for some special ed kids or something like that, is participating in that. So in MyFlex, really, anybody who's in the system at that time can, as a student, decide to sign up for something, or as a teacher pull them. What's unique about the study halls is it's a subset of your students, right? The system needs to be aware of who are the students that are in a study hall section first period, second period, and then they are the only ones who during that period should be able to sign up to go to the library or something like that. So how do we do that, okay? So first, it all starts with the data from the student information system. And specifically, the schedule data, right? Because we need to know, just like back here where we saw from their SIS over here, that this student first period is in section 121 of study with Wright and Andrea Correa, right? It needs to know that, and that comes from the schedule. So the first thing we're bringing over is the schedule. So whether that's from Aspen or Power School, or whether you're using ClassLink, the schedule is going to allow us to know when those students are available, right? So every night, as you can say, Allie, right, the data's coming over, if schedules change, if your study hall changes, that's important, okay? So that comes over to MyFlex. Now, the next thing is, so our schedule data is brought in, is we need to align or link the student to their study periods, okay? So in the system, Barrington has all their study periods, and then if this student, Jane, is in study A or study B or whatever they choose to call them, right? It's going to link the student, which then also is linked to the period, okay? So it knows then that only students that have a study period A should see that on their calendar as something that they can sign up for. Okay, so every night it knows, and it correctly will set up the students to only be able to sign up. Now, not only that, and I know you and I talked about this, remember Barrington has a situation where you have kids that have a study period A for 5 days, but then you may have some that have a study for period A for 10 days, okay? So what our system will actually do is, if there's a student that only has it for 5 days, it will hide the days they're not in study. Okay, so, because those other days in your SIS, they're taking for you guys PE, okay, or something like that, all right? So really, we're making that link. And then what that all means then, if you look here, is this is a student coming in and basically having a study period, it's a little hard to see, but where they can come in and just for that period, sign up for whatever options. And that one I gave was just an option called Open Library, right? You don't have to have a lot of options that are in there. Now, Whitman, Hanson, Allen, I think they, a lot of the schools, it's pretty much libraries. You sounded like some counselors, things like that, okay? So that's kind of the flow of that process. Any questions on kind of that setup or the concept behind it? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, and again, the critical piece is the system knowing and appropriately allowing students to sign up only when they have their study hours. Whereas, for an Eagle block here, the student really is every day, right? You see that these ones are occurring where these ones are only occurring on certain days. Anything else to add to that, Allie? You think about in the setup or things you guys needed to think of or stuff like that?
I mean, it gets really individualized, because even for school counseling, we have an area in school counseling where students can just go and work individually or work by themselves and kind of set away, or they can actually sign up to meet with individual counselors during that time. So even in just counseling, it can get as individualized as that, which is really nice.
Yeah, and for those of you that have seen MyFlex or use it, like what goes along with everything we're talking about is all the benefits of MyFlex, meaning you can offer or have them be able to sign up for whatever you want during that time. In my example, it was just, a open library was the only option, but you could have counseling options, things like that. MyFlex also has the options where you can allow, teacher requests, meaning the student requests to go to that class, but they're not put into it until the teacher approves it, stuff like that. The biggest thing I would say is what we talked about before, and why, if you were trying to manage this either in Aspen or whatever your student information system, one of the biggest issues is accountability, is attendance, right? So now, if a student has signed up to go to the library during that study period on Monday, they don't need to first show up at the study hall to get attendance taken for them and then head on down to the library, right? They can just go to the library because the librarian or whoever's in charge of that time is going to have their roster of the students who are supposed to be there, and is gonna be able to take accurate attendance. And those of you who know too, we can even send that back into Aspen or Power School or whatever you use for student information.
And it takes the ability away from them to say, I have study, and the library to really, I don't know if you're gonna study, but now they know. So it really helps to get accurate information for each class period.
Right. Okay, so let's just jump back here to ours. All right, so any questions on that setup or anything?
Steve,
Go ahead.
So for anybody who may not be familiar with MyFlex, additional piece that happens nightly is a refresh of the data from your student information to MyFlex. So schedule changes, right? They're fluid, especially at certain times of the year. So those studies that might be changing with student schedules, that's going to be refreshed in MyFlex nightly, so that if the student's schedule today said, for tomorrow says they have study, but they make a change in their schedule today, and tomorrow they don't have study, that's immediate, that nightly refresh will reflect it, so that tomorrow they don't have study and they can't do it. So.
And I think what we've seen some schools, and you folks I think too, the first few weeks, right? You may not allow the signups right away until everybody kind of gets in, and that also has an added benefit. Maybe those schedule changes slow down a touch.
I will say though, this year, people were disappointed that I didn't have it from the start. When they didn't start with MyFlex, they were pretty upset with me that I didn't have that going. They really thought, they thought it was, I mean, it does, it just works so much better.
So I mean, that kind of leads us into the next question of like, okay, so that's the setup, right? We saw the need. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, they wanted to just give more choice, more options during that study hall. I mean, it really, to me, it takes that study hall from just being, hey, go sit there to, whatever level you take it to, more options. Talk a little bit, Allie, about kind of how it's gone, what the feedback has been, the benefits, like how, how's it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the feedback really kind of recognized the positivity of it at the start of the year when I didn't have it set up to go, and they were really upset about that, which I understood that to be. It just got clunky again. So I think what happens with what our schools noticed with MyFlex is every time something comes up, it's part of the conversation. Well, that would be really easy to schedule with MyFlex. Just things that are outside of what our original thought process was for. Our ultimate goal too is to take full attendance in MyFlex at some point. It's a lot, but that's our goal. Just because I think we want to minimize platform usage for our teachers, and it's so user friendly, and it's really hard to mess up once you're in there and you're a teacher. So that's been really key. So we just kind of keep expanding what it is. Something that we've noticed too is during that study block, we do want to push it a little bit further. We've got kids that are in resource during that study block, but they may be scheduled for 3 different places. So they may have their resource block, they may have their math interventionist, they may have their reading interventionist, and it's really hard for those teachers to be able to take attendance where those kids belong, and those kids are often avoiders, and so it allows them to avoid. So that's another place we want to push to, is even creating that. We also have a time within study period, which is directed support, which is very targeted executive functioning support during study. We've always had that in Aspen, but we've never put that in MyFlex. And so the conversation now is that that just makes sense to put into MyFlex. So we've got a bunch of things during that time to push into MyFlex, and even thinking about activities and clubs. We do that during the flex block, but to have that opportunity during study too is something we're talking about.
I mean, that's it, and I think your experience is similar to what other schools would say, which is really encouraging for us. Is once you get in and you see the ease of use, the ease of setup, really, right? It doesn't take a lot once you're using it for one thing, right? There's a lot of different places that you can go with this, and you mentioned some after school clubs. We've had a school Ellen has been talking to that's using this now to track their in-school suspensions.
Yeah.
They're, the times when students they're in school, but they're pulled out and they're in a separate thing. And again, a lot of, with all the benefits that the system gives you, I think one of the biggest ones, which you mentioned, is accurate attendance, right? The ability really on every day, if a student's being pulled out. As you heard Allie mention, the great thing about our system too is a lot of people start with, all right, I'm gonna come in and, create that traditional Eagle block, and I'm just starting with that, and then they're like, oh, we could use this for after school, we could use this. One thing to mention for those that don't know, all of these, right, where Allie has her Eagle's Nest, or she set up her study periods, these are periods she as an admin or the admin have defined, right, much like your schedule. But MyFlex also has the functionality that we call teacher appointments, which allows teachers to create these meetings, these instances, outside of those defined times, right? So I said, my son's in middle school, and every year at open house, I'm like, man, they should really use MyFlex, because the teachers say, I'm available on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, but make sure you email me so I get, and I'm like, man, they could just use this to sign up, stuff like that. So the teacher appointment functionality adds even more flexibility, because it allows really you to kind of break free from, it just being this flexible.
And we utilize that through MTSS too during our study block. So if there's a teacher that's available that's even has a study block, but they're able to provide intervention during that time, kids can sign up to meet with that specific teacher. It's a different option, but they can sign to meet up with that teacher during that time too.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, sure.
So I saw that it will sync with Power School.
Yeah.
Is it a separate app or is it a plugin?
It's a separate app. So, so we are a completely separate product from PowerSchool, from Aspen, right? But we interact and partner with all those. So for instance, for PowerSchool, I mean, the one added benefit for those folks who know us, our background was student information systems, so we know them really well, and we had some context. So for PowerSchool, for instance, we have pre-written exports, right, that you can install in PowerSchool that will give us all the data we need. Some schools choose to use that, some schools choose to use ClassLink, right, and then use ClassLink and PowerSchool, but yeah, it is a separate product.
But it's such more, it's so, I mean, our staff said, because we use Aspen, and our teachers much prefer using MyFlex than Aspen, and so that's why, because it can be so clunky on the Aspen side, so that's why switching full-time is really, they really want that.
For the attendance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you know if it talks to Pearson, Access, MyFlex?
I mean, we can really talk with any student information system. So yeah, I mean, these are the ones that we've currently kind of worked directly with, but again, that's our background, so it shouldn't be a problem. I mean, obviously, there's also standard, right? So like obviously if you use ClassLink or even if you use like web roster exports, the amount of data, really, I mean, the only data we absolutely need for the system to use is student and staff data. Obviously, the next piece that's really beneficial, which allows Barrington to do things like their study halls, is the scheduled data, right? Like knowing what classes the students take. Now, for flex scheduling, the scheduled data really becomes beneficial more as a teacher tool, because like during Allie's Eagle block, what teachers can do is go in and quickly pull up their rosters and even see grades, right? And they can say like, who needs extra help? Who can I pull in, right? But for the study stuff, it's more like that. But yeah, I mean, we can work with any. So, and if you have questions about the flex scheduling too, please don't hesitate to ask for those. Other questions? Yeah.
When are students signing up?
So for us, we have it that, I don't know, it is the same, so for our flex block, they have until the period before, because teachers need time to be able to approve that. For study though, is it the same, the
Yeah,
period
it should be
before,
the
it should be the same, so then they have until the period before they're able to go to sign up. And we stick to that, so we're really, because it can get really tricky if we don't, so we're really push on teachers and say, if they haven't signed up, you're not taking them, put them back, because they have to use the MyFlex app. But we started where we didn't give them any time, like they could do it until the period, and that became overwhelming for teachers who wanted to approve students to come, so it's now the block before.
So in the system, as you know, you can control, both on both sides, when they can start signing up, okay, but then also, as Allie was saying, cut it off a certain amount of minutes, so students can make schedule changes, so that the teachers know what their roster is, a half an hour before, or whatever.
And there's flexibility within, some teachers want it so that they have to approve, some teachers don't want to have to approve, they just want kids to be able to come, so there's flexibility in going to each individual teacher's profile and change that.
How do you get the students buy-in? Like, we've talked about doing this before in our school district, and in sort of in practice and in pilot, the students either don't sign up, or they do sign up and then they switch back at the last second. So what's some of the best practices around, like, getting them to stick with it?
Specifically for study or for kind of all of it?
Kind of all of it.
Yeah, so we tried to be incredibly purposeful in how we were rolling this out last year. And we spent, so in our Eagle Block, we spent about an entire rotation. We created lessons for students and for the teachers to give those lessons on how to utilize them, what they are. And they don't always follow that, but what works for us is the teachers will say, like, no, you're not coming unless you sign up. So you need to go back to where you need to go back, or I'm walking you back. We haven't really had a lot of negative buy-in from students, I have to say. Students are really take advantage of it, and oftentimes will email me and say, I wasn't able to get in, it was like a 3-minute cutoff, can you put me in with another student? So they really, buy-in for our students wasn't a problem. I would say for our older students. For our younger students, they're not moving so much. So for our freshmen and our sophomore classes, we really have to push them to utilize the tool and to utilize their resources appropriately. For our juniors and seniors, they're using it more than we could ever hope that they would use. So it's just, we had to intentionally teach them, and then hold them accountable when they didn't do it accurately. So if they didn't, they got consequences.
I think from our perspective, it's a really interesting question, right? Because obviously, from a product standpoint, you know, we set out to build a product that would make sure that you know where the students were, would keep them accountable and things like that. But as we, you know, learn more about flex time, engagement is an important thing, right? Because if nobody's signing up, right, then it's just a glorified study hall where everybody's just sitting where they are. So there's a couple things we tried to work with schools on. Now, I think part of it could be, you know, your policy and your process, meaning like some schools choose to, and I don't remember how you guys do, but leave their students on schedule by default, right? So basically meaning if you don't sign up for something, somebody's gonna be, you know, poking you, and we can talk about the ways to do that, and basically, you know, prompting you, you've got to sign up for something. The other thing, like for instance, like nothing in here right now, but like something like in our system, this feed, right? The idea behind this, where here in this feed, I can either put in an announcement or I can also promote classes.
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind this, like especially the promote classes, was, you know, hey, we feel like we've got a lot of great options that we're putting out there for kids, well beyond just, you know, extra help. There's enrichment, there's SEL, but nobody's signing up for it, right? So one way is maybe if we can promote these so the kids can see them right in the system and sign up from there. But yeah, I mean, engagement's an interesting thing. The one thing I will say, and I think Alan and anybody else would agree with this, is overall, certainly, right, you're gonna get feedback, you know, pushback from students, certainly you're gonna get it from teachers, right? The funny thing is we've now had situations where people have then used our system and then either, you know, the school did away with the flex block, so they're not using it anymore, or they went to another system. And now we've actually had schools that went to another system where they came back because the kids were like, we like MyFlex better. Or we've had schools where they eliminated the flex block and the students really fought hard to keep it because of, you know, not the system, but the concept of the flex block, of having the choice, having the, you know, the options to sign up for. So I think hopefully it would organically, with a good system, grow, but it's, you know, an interesting one.
But to distinguish between the two, so study period, those kids are actively seeking to go places. So there's already buy-in there. That's not something we struggle with. During the flex time, we do have to act. Kids are not always checking their MyFlex, and so that is something that we have to kind of go at. We put it on the morning show every morning. We have a morning show, check your MyFlex today, make sure you're checking your MyFlex. I mean, I am still sometimes on the PA, like every junior, check your MyFlex, you're going somewhere, you know? We utilize that system too, and we're hoping that just over time, kids are checking that, and definitely our older kids are, but there is a difference between, for our school at least, the buy-in between the flex block and the study hall movement, because they want to do that. A lot of them want to do it for the flex block too, but they're not as actively always checking that. So that's work, yeah.
So I come from a district that did use MyFlex, and then we got a new principal midway through the year last year, and she came in and got rid of our flex block. And the pushback that we had from staff and students was huge, actually. So we're actively trying to work it back into our schedule. But we had kids start, more so the older kids, but even I teach special ed, so for me it was a great place to pull all of my kids for like interventions or just checking their grades, finding things like missing assignments, printing those things out. But we had a group of juniors and seniors who created a petition to fight to add a flex block back into their schedule.
And it's funny because that's like, we've probably heard 4 or 5 schools that are similar to that.
I mean, we fought really hard for it. We had a really large team that came together to work for this. And we looked at MyFlex, but we looked at about 3 other platforms as well and engaged in dialogue and conversations with other platforms. And they just didn't offer what we were looking, and what they weren't as easy. They were clunky, and we were really, really worried about teacher buy-in with another platform. And so we wanted to make sure that that was something that really worked for us. And so MyFlex, it's just sort of like pros and cons. The MyFlex was just, he's not asking me to say this, but MyFlex was just beyond pros. I also have to say, they're just so supportive. Like, I can't not say this. I just frantically send emails, and I'm like, I've messed this up, or I don't know how to do this. And not only did they support, but he sends videos on like, this is exactly what you need to do, so it's like, even I can figure it out. So, but it's so helpful and it's so quick and in the moment, so I think like, we wouldn't even consider going somewhere else because the support we're getting on the other end is just huge.
I mean, the one thing, it's almost like we would love every school to understand that's thinking about it. You almost, schools that have gone through it is one, and it's been really nice for us as a, I mean, our background is student information systems, right? Implementations that take years and never go well, and people get fired over, it just grinds, right? One, how easy it is to implement this. We had a school this year, halfway through September, Pennsylvania came, they had switched to another system, didn't work, and they needed to switch. We switched them in 2 days. They're a power school, right? So we got their data up 2 days, they switched over, and they're doing great, okay? So I almost want to make it like, say, like you just got to kind of jump in, and it's gonna be, like, not every situation goes great, right? But overwhelmingly, what I see from schools is generally they go faster. We can do more because it went well.
Yeah.
People picked it up, we can do more, you know? And obviously, you know, there's things you need to think about, the buy-in, the time, where do you get the time? We had some schools that, right, you need to make sure you position this time correctly as non-instructional time versus instructional and things like that. But it's, overall, I wish we could say, like, it's really easy, and I think the benefits you get, there's not many things you implement that the benefits are like, oh, this is really easy, we got a lot of benefits.
We use it so for so many things. Next week is PSAT and MassCue if anybody is in high school, and we need to do digital readiness tests. So it was easy. I scheduled that in my flex to pull kids on Thursday, tomorrow and Friday. So it was easy to get 175 kids scheduled to do a digital readiness test over 2 days. We did the first time ever, we did book clubs for summer reading, and to get, and really have to meet with teachers to go over and have book discussions. So we had about 300, 400 kids that signed up with 25 teachers, and we scheduled that through MyFlex. It was really easy. It's scheduled in like a day. So you think it's like an overwhelming task, not even a day. I mean, I scheduled the kids for digital readiness in like 5 minutes. I created my course and just put the kids in. So it's these really large things that people were kind of like, how are we gonna manage this? And it's really easy to manage it. We just have to use MyFlex. So it kind of, we utilize it for a whole slew of different things. We utilize it for senior project, for getting kids together to give information about that. We use it for check-ins with senior project. So it does, you just begin to see the possibilities and how easy it is to do every time something comes up.
Other questions? All right. Well, thanks everybody for your time. If you have other questions, feel free to come up and ask, or stop by. We're at booth 503. And we have a great basket giveaway. My wife slaves every year and gives me a hard time about putting it together. So come enter for that. It's awesome. It's got a Stanley in it. But thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.